Dr. Guy Lamb, a crime and policing expert from Stellenbosch University, joins us now via video link to weigh in on violence and crime challenges in Soshanguve and surrounding areas. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Lamb, and thank you so much for your time. Ultimately, this deadly shooting at the Marimi informal settlement has left 6 patrollers dead and 4 others in hospital. Police, as you've been hearing, are still piecing, of course, together information on this matter, with 1 person now behind bars. 5 or so many others are believed to still be at large. What are your observations on this matter so far?
Well, look, South Africa is a particularly violent country, especially within informal settlements, because these are settlements that are very difficult for the South African police services to police because they have access point problems. They don't necessarily have roads going through them. The sort of passageways are quite narrow. So what tends to happen is communities engage in policing themselves. But in informal settlements typically are characterized by high levels of crime. Also, crime in South Africa is dominated by firearm use. So the policing, whether it's by SAPS or it's by Metro Police or law enforcement or by community members themselves, is particularly dangerous, and you put your lives at risk. And I think that's what's demonstrated here. But the issue is you've got, many informal settlements struggle from a lack of adequate policing. So residents do try and make it safer by patrolling. But the problem is that because you already are just patrolling with your bodies, don't have access to weapons, you're not legally entitled to use weapons and that kind of policing, is that you are at risk of criminals who have access to firearms. And what we saw here is, kind of community members getting massacred by armed criminals. And certainly this is not the first case. We've seen this happen in many other cases. If we go back a few years to Philippi East and the Western Cape, we saw similar incidences of community members getting shot in mass shootings by armed gangs in those areas. So it's certainly not the first time this has happened.
And I want us to talk about these mass shootings in a moment, but we are also, starting to piece some information from community members through several reports, and most of them saying that it is through desperate attempts for residents to keep safe from criminals, that they are getting these people and these patrollers looking after them. But what is that, almost like community members taking that upon themselves to be safe? What does that tell us about policing in areas like Marimi informal settlement, and in fact in several other areas, as you've also just mentioned, in the country, and the police's efforts to address crime levels in areas such as this one?
It's a really difficult situation because, as I mentioned previously, policing informal settlements is very dangerous. The SAPs themselves have encountered, this is where you see SAPs members losing their lives. And they have protocols in place where you can't have individual SAPS members patrolling those particular areas, especially at night. It's incredibly dangerous. So you tend to see at the sort of station level that it's not necessarily prioritized because it's so difficult and so dangerous. And as a result, community members respond. The ideal scenario, and it's certainly been commentary from the Soshanguve CPF, is ideally community groups should be working with the community policing forums, because community policing forums do have access to resources. They have a direct line to the police. There are ways and means of providing extra backup if these community patrollers want to do patrolling. But when you have these kind of incidences where community patrollers are acting more independently, it does speak to a sort of a breakdown in relationships that exist in that area, that you don't have a good working relationship, certainly between the police and various community members in that area.
And Dr. Lamb, let's talk about just the high levels of extortion in some of these community. To what extent do you think they are related to organized crime, in fact, and maybe even gang-related activities? Maybe they have an influence in this, considering just the rise of the kind of violence that we are seeing. We understand in this particular area, there are about 3 or 4 extortionist groups among this community that target issues like electricity, as well as safety, and so on.
Well, extortion has always been happening within South Africa, but at a much lower level, certainly prior to 2020, but certainly after the COVID lockdowns, we've seen a dramatic increase in extortion, and we're seeing an increase in groups that are perpetrating it. And it's become quite popular amongst criminal groups to do it. So initially it was gangs that were doing it. You saw it in the nightclub trade and the restaurant trade. But also increasingly focusing on foreign nationals who run spaza shops, other businesses, sort of shakedowns happening there. But now increasingly you're seeing extortion happening in almost every aspect of income generation in many of the poorer neighborhoods within South Africa. And of course, you've got different groups competing with each other, trying to extort money out of residents, out of businesses, and violence is used to try and eliminate competition. It's either used to demonstrate, power and demonstrate force, that you convince people to pay you by using violence, that there will be violent consequences, and you use violence as an extortion group to try and eliminate your rivals. So you are seeing extortion going hand in hand with quite significant increases in violent crime, and of course firearm-related crime happens because of this.
And what are the main challenges, do you think, that law enforcement faces in preventing some of these mass shootings? You mentioned firearms. We know how readily available they can be, particularly for criminals to get a hold of.
Yeah, I mean, the one aspect is obviously tackling illegal firearms and ammunition and having policing operations to deal with that. But when it comes to extortion, it's really about securing convictions. And that's particularly difficult for the police to build cases because you need the evidence. And the evidence is primarily derived from witnesses who can identify the suspects, who are willing to prepare to present themselves in court. And of course, many residents wouldn't want to do that because it's quite dangerous to do that. Your life or the lives of your family may in jeopardy when you do that. So it's very much around that is especially difficult to get for the police to get residents to trust them, but then also for them to build cases that the NPA is willing to take to court and secure prosecutions. And if we don't have prosecutions, extortion will just continue because it sort of indicates to those who perpetrated that they can get away with it and will continue to do it. And it's often seen as easy money. So ultimately, it comes down to try and bolster policing resources in these neighborhoods, build relationships with the community members, provide protection to those who are willing to give witness statements, who are prepared to present themselves in court. And I think that's the only way we can really deal with it.
You are quite right about the trust deficit. It is really a problem, particularly when you consider in this particular case, most people are saying that they are fearing for their lives, but they would rather not come forward. But Dr. Lamb, that's all the time we have for this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Guy Lamb is a crime and policing expert at the Stellenbosch University there for us.